My name is David Crawley. This video is about Kairos Prison Ministry, and it's also about prayer. I want to tell you a story about an inmate named Chris, who was at one of our previous Kairos 4-day weekends. Every Kairos weekend begins with a kickoff on Thursday afternoons. Inmates and volunteers meet each other for the first time. During the kickoff, energy is high, expectations are good, everyone is upbeat. People are happy to be meeting each other for the first time. During this particular weekend, people couldn't help but notice one person, an inmate named Chris, who did not seem to fit in. Whereas everybody else was in good spirits, Chris seemed downcast and dejected. It seemed that he was in some emotional pain and he had no hope of relief. He seemed very much out of place and tormented. People wondered what could be wrong. It was later learned that Chris suffered from sleep deprivation. He couldn't sleep more than 30 minutes at a time, and he hadn't had a good night's sleep in over 7 years. Chris took his chair at the table of Matthew, seated next to a volunteer named Ron, an anesthesiologist at a local hospital. Ron could see that Chris was not fitting in well, and so he made efforts to draw him out. Ron learned that Chris had been in prison for 7 years. Chris had no idea when he was scheduled for release, and he didn't care. He described himself as worthless, and he impressed Ron as perhaps the most oppressed human being on the planet. For the rest of Thursday night, Chris said very little. While others were talking or engaged, Chris seemed to be somewhere else. Ron wondered if anything that was being said was getting through. The next morning, Friday, Ron met Chris in the library. The rest of the day, Friday, continued very much the same as Thursday. While others talked and sang and prayed, Chris just kind of sat there, hardly engaged, kind of a non-person in an otherwise energetic environment. Chris's non-involvement continued until early Friday night, when a speaker was giving a message, "You're not alone." The speaker talked about the love of God and told inmates that God knew everything about them and was already at work in their lives. And as the speaker said these things, he called for a giant prayer chain, kind of like this, that was made up of thousands of loops. Each loop contained the name of one person who had promised to pray for the weekend. As the prayer chain was being taped to the wall, Chris suddenly snapped to attention for the first time. And he said to Ron, "Do you mean to tell me that every person on that prayer chain is praying for me?" And Ron said that that is exactly what the meaning of the prayer chain was. Chris seemed to think about this very deeply. A short time later, the speaker concluded, and Chris spoke to Ron again. He asked, "Do you suppose that we could go up to that prayer chain and that I could choose one of those loops, and whoever's name I pick, would you call that person and tell them that I said thank you for your prayers?" Well, Ron was touched by this request, but he was also taken back. And he pointed out to Chris that there were thousands of names on the prayer chain, and finding any one person would be almost impossible. But he agreed to try. So they walked up, and Chris selected a loop and read the name Jeff Haller. And Ron almost fell off of his feet. By some marvel, Chris had picked the name of a very close friend of Ron's, someone whose contact information was easily available. Ron said it would be a joy to call Jeff that night. About an hour later, the meeting ended. Ron went home with a sense of astonishment, and Chris returned to his dorm thinking about God and the things that had been said. He laid on his bed, but had trouble sleeping. Like I said, he always had trouble sleeping. He had mixed reactions as he thought about Kairos. On the one hand, the gospel was really a compelling message. But on the other hand, he was on unfamiliar territory. What might happen if he opened his life to God? What might he have to give up? After thinking about these things for a while, Chris finally resolved that he would return to Kairos the next day, and he would open his mind to whatever was being said about God. And he fell asleep. And then something truly astonishing happened. Chris slept the entire night without waking once. He slept deeply, so deeply, in fact, that he had to be woken the next day, something that never happened before. He woke refreshed, and it was a small miracle. Ron was waiting for him in the library, and Ron was looking forward to telling him about his conversation with Jeff. And when Ron saw Chris, he realized that this was the same person, but Chris looked, quote, dramatically different. He had given his life to God, and now he felt better. Chris and Ron took their seats. Ron watched in amazement as Chris was able to engage other people and participate in everything that was happening. How could this be the same person as before? Question: what happened to Chris that night that allowed him to sleep for the first time in 7 years? I don't know, but I do feel convinced that it was the prayers of God's people that brought the event about. Question: how will things end up for Chris? Only God knows. I'm sure that Chris will have a hard life in many ways, but I choose to share the optimism of St. Paul, who said to the Philippians, I'm sure that he who began a good work in you will bring it about to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Let me conclude now by saying this. Prayer is a real thing. Kairos has a vital ministry that changes lives. Through this video, I'm hoping to add 1,000 names to our prayer chain. I'm asking two things. One, send me an email at the address below, and I will add your name to our prayer chain. Please pray for us November 4, 5, 6, and 7. And two, as you pray, please read daily the 25th chapter of Matthew. Allow that passage to inform your prayers. And who knows, maybe like Jeff, you also will receive a phone call thanking you for your prayers. I thank you.